Podcast Episode 2. Stay in the room, domestic edition runtime, approximately 10 minutes. The playground at home, what the British weekend told us. The last episode argued that the Trump-Xi summit was strategic reconnaissance between two over-leveraged powers, conducted in front of a watching world that was not consulted. Continental Europe is, imperfectly, beginning to grasp the structural moment and respond. That episode deliberately left a question unanswered. Why is Britain, which shares the strategic predicament, having a different conversation about it? The British weekend just past, May 14 to 17, 2026, answers the question, not in commentary, in street violence, council chambers, march placards, and the things our public conversation cannot bring itself to name. This isn't an episode about events, it's about the mechanism beneath the events. Let me walk you through the weekend. Stirchley, Birmingham. The Raise the Colours campaign hung Union Jacks and St George's crosses along Mayfield Road. Local residents removed some of them. The flags were replaced immediately. Removed. Replaced. The replacement behaviour matters. It's not a political statement. It's a dominance loop. The assertion that the territory is ours to define, and your removal of our markers requires our immediate reassertion of them. On Mayfield Road, a man in his 30s was hit by a van. Broken leg. Surgery required. The driver fled. The van bore Raise the Colours branding. Police are investigating. The pattern isn't confined to Stirchley. Lancashire alone has spent over £61,000 on flag removal this summer. Greater Manchester, the Midlands, same pattern. In Essex, Reform UK took control of the county council. Their first documented governing decision was the removal of the Ukrainian flag, flying there since the 2022 invasion, replaced with a second Union Jack. The justification was framed as British citizens not virtue signalling. That's the first publicly documented governing decision Reform has made as an institutional party. Worth holding in mind as evidence of ideological priority. In London on Saturday, the Unite the Kingdom march brought approximately 60,000 people onto the streets. 4,000 police. Drones. Live facial recognition. Britain First's flag was visible inside the march, alongside Union Jacks and St George's crosses. Placards read, "We will not be replaced." That specific phrase has appeared in the manifestos of the Christchurch, Paso, and Pittsburgh mass casualty shooters. Other placards read, "Hands off our kids." A rival pro-Palestinian Nakba commemoration produced what the academic Tim Wilson terms mutually radicalizing ecosystems. Each side convinced it holds the moral future. Each apocalyptic about the other. Each seeing the state as biased toward its enemy. Behind all of it, an industrial-scale information environment. A Sri Lankan influencer making around $300,000 running racist Facebook accounts targeting British older people. An AI-generated video of fake Muslim women complaining about dogs on beaches reaching 1.7 million views. A Pakistan-based operator running Islamophobic AI content for British audiences as a business model. And amplified across the Atlantic in real time. Jack Posobiec carrying the London March to MAGA audiences. David J. Harris Jr., 3.4 million followers, generating 71,000 engagements on March coverage. American right-wing pages treating London as the front line of the US culture war. This is not coincidence. This is operational infrastructure. Now, here's the mechanism. Status decline processed as existential threat, responded to with domination assertion because parity is psychologically unavailable as a destination. Let me say that again, because it does work no other formulation does. Status decline. Processed as existential threat, responded to with domination assertion. Because parity is psychologically unavailable as a destination. I've previously identified what I called the asymmetry of nationalisms. Scottish and Welsh nationalism converts grievance into a claim for parity. The argument is Scotland and Wales should have what England has. English nationalism, as expressed this weekend, converts grievance into territorial assertion. It is not asking for what others have. It is declaring the right to define the space. Hanging a flag is not the same as removing a flag. Hanging a flag is an assertion. Removing it is editorial. When the removed flag is replaced immediately, the replacement is not symbolic. It is the physical enforcement of the assertion. The Mayfield Road hit and run, if the investigation establishes what the documented van branding suggests, is the same mechanism applied to bodies rather than poles. The Essex Council Ukrainian flag decision is the institutional version. Removing a flag of solidarity with a country under invasion by the same Russian state that has been documented attempting to murder people on British streets and replacing it with a second Union Jack, that is not virtue signalling in reverse. It is the assertion that the space being defended is exclusively ours. That solidarity with anyone outside that space is illegitimate. That the boundary between us and them is the only legitimate political question. The London March placards make the structure visible. "We will not be replaced" is not a defensive statement, it's a domination claim. Replacement, in this vocabulary, is what happens when the space stops being ours. The fear is not that the space will be shared. The fear is that the space will be redefined by people who are not us. The response is not negotiation. The response is the assertion of the right to define the space. Tim Wilson's two-faction analysis captures what happened on the march. There were politically disenfranchised people there, people whose grievances about deindustrialization, housing, opportunity, meaning are entirely legitimate. There were also overt white supremacists there. The march fused them under a single banner. That fusion is not a side effect, it is the operational objective. Tommy Robinson, urging march attendees to join formal political parties, is the street constitutional absorption mechanism made explicit. The fusion at street level is being designed to migrate into electoral politics. This is the mechanism. This is what the weekend was demonstrating. Now here's where this connects to the international episode. I called it the playground. Two class bullies fighting, while the rest of the class slowly realizes they'll be sanctioned too. That analogy didn't arrive forced. It arrived because the same structural mechanism operates at every scale. America under Trump is processing status decline as existential threat and responding with dominance assertion because parity with China is psychologically unavailable. The G2 frame Trump accepted in Beijing was sold as peer partnership. It was actually the acknowledgement, in language Trump could not himself recognize, that American primacy is over. The Stirchley flag replacement loop is the same mechanism at postcode level. The space is no longer reliably ours. The reassertion of markers is the substitute for the reality. The Essex Council decision is the same mechanism at institutional level. Shared European commitment to opposing Russian aggression is no longer ideologically tolerable because it implies obligations beyond the asserted boundary. The London March placards are the same mechanism at civilizational level. The country is changing demographically, economically, and culturally in ways that cannot be reversed. The placards are not arguing for a policy. They are asserting that the change itself is illegitimate. Same mechanism. Geopolitical, institutional, street level. Different actors. Different agendas. Same structural failure mode. I've previously named what I call the vocabulary cost, the way Brexit consumed the conceptual language Britain needed for post-industrial navigation, interdependence as practical interest, European alignment as national strategy, honest managed decline. These were the words Britain needed to describe its actual situation, toxified by being coded as the enemy's position. Charles Moore's recent Spectator interview with the pro-European former diplomat Piotr Curzin made the vocabulary cost visible in a single human encounter. Curzin squirmed visibly. Moore was fluent, authoritative, operating in a political vocabulary Brexit broke for serious use. Curzin knew this. He couldn't say so in that room. Moore accidentally identified the structural vulnerability that gives the hung Parliament strategy its window. He noted, correctly, that the first-past-the-post electoral system is vulnerable to a government winning a commanding majority on a 24% vote share. He described the preconditions for the strategy without recognizing what he was describing. He cannot recognize it because his framework has no category for what is actually happening to British politics. Now Andy Burnham and Wes Streeting are openly advocating EU rejoining. That separates European alignment from the Corbyn era left entirely. It repositions European alignment as practical national interest. A Burnham-led coalition offering European realignment and electoral reform is not Labour recalibrating. It's the early architecture of a new political settlement being assembled. A note on the evidential discipline this episode requires. There is a temptation, especially in comment sections, to state the Russia connection as established. It isn't, not at the organisational level for Reform UK as a whole. But what is established belongs at documented fact level. Let me set it out. Nigel Farage, 2014, on record at the European Parliament, Putin was actually on our side, Farage, and his then colleague Nathan Gill, sitting in the same room at the same time, delivered identical anti-NATO and anti-Ukraine rhetoric. Gill was subsequently sentenced to 10.5 years for accepting pro-Russian money for delivering those specific views. That's court record. Alice Weidel, leader of the AfD, a party with confirmed Russian financial links, uses the same poking the Russian bear phrasing Farage used in 2014. James Orr, Reform UK policy advisor, has publicly minimised the Ukraine war as a regional Slavic conflict he does not care about. And now, Essex County Council, under reform control, has removed the Ukrainian flag as its first publicly documented governing decision. That's a serious evidential case built carefully. It does not assert what it cannot prove. It does establish that reform's leadership rhetoric, its convicted associates, its institutional decisions, and its messaging patterns converge on a position that serves Russian strategic interests, whether or not the organizational chain of financial connection can yet be drawn. The convergence is itself the evidence. It does not require the conspiracy theory to be analytically devastating. It is more powerful than the assertion because it cannot be dismissed. The British comment sections this weekend are reaching for the word terrorist. That reach is understandable. It's also analytically misdirected. Tim Wilson's closing observation is the structural reading the moment requires. What is visible in Britain right now is not a polarized country in the energized factions straining toward each other sense. It is a deeply exhausted country fracturing simultaneously. That distinction matters. Polarization, in the political science sense, implies two coherent sides with internal organization, programs, the capacity to negotiate or to fight. What's happening in Britain is something more dangerous than polarization. It's the simultaneous fragmentation of multiple constituencies, none of which has a coherent political vehicle, all of which are being offered simple answers to complex problems by political entrepreneurs who profit from the offering. The fire is still hot. The communities Thatcher's destruction of industrial Britain burned are being asked to vote for a structurally similar economic program dressed in different clothes. The person holding their hand toward the fire has changed. The fire has not. Jeff, the half-Asian British Army veteran I use as ethical anchor, more rooted in this country than most of those carrying flags this weekend, deserves better than to be told the source of his precarity is people who look like him. So where does this leave us? The last episode ended on the dead spot. What we have is not hope. What we have is determination and a closing window. Continental Europe is, imperfectly, beginning to build the architecture of response. The British dimension is not separate from that picture. It is the specific national failure that the broader European response now has to work around. Britain shares the strategic predicament. It has specifically disabled its own capacity to name the predicament because the language required has been toxified for political use. It is processing the same structural pressures continental Europe is processing, but doing so in a vocabulary that prevents the response continental Europe is beginning to mount. The hung parliament strategy remains the only available structural path: tactical voting at the next general election. Coalition mathematics making proportional representation the non-negotiable price of supporting any government. PR legislated in the first parliamentary session. Lock-in of structural protection before any future reform commanding majority government can prevent it. None of this is hopeful. All of it is difficult. None of it is guaranteed to succeed. The alternative is democratic lock-in by a party whose first documented governing decision was to remove a flag of solidarity with a country fighting Russian invasion. The country is not unified. It is exhausted. The flags on Mayfield Road are not unity. They are the assertion of dominance by people who cannot process the loss of the world they remember as anything other than someone else's fault. The Mayfield Road hit and run is what happens when assertion meets resistance. What Britain needs is not hope. Hope is not yet available. What Britain needs is the recognition that the same mechanism operating in Beijing, in Brussels, in Essex, and in Stirchley is one mechanism, and that what is required of us is the patient, unglamorous, slow work of building the institutional response before the window closes. The fire is still hot. The flags do not change the temperature. Jeff deserves better. We are not speculating. We are watching. Stay in the room.